You're a child of immigrants?
I am. My mom's from the Philippines.
Okay.
Came over when she was 22.
Okay. I'm also a child of Egyptian immigrants. What fascinated me the most about this, and it touched me deeply, totally different culture. Some similarities, Asian, specifically Korean, but we had the same experience. Like identical. Well, let's watch it. Yeah.
For the first time in 22 years, I spent Christmas with my mom, 3 full days in Montauk.
Our humanity is what it's called. I love that.
And it reminded me of how little progress we've made in the maturation of our relationship. I'm talking about a particularly unique source of heartache for children of immigrants who are born in a different country, growing up speaking a different language than their parents. And that heartache is both conscious and subconscious. I would argue it's more on the subconscious end of things, because if you're like me, I used to believe, when misunderstood, that my mom was actively choosing to misunderstand me because of the inherent nature of Korean parenting, which demands subjugation. And I'm realizing more and more, no, it's fundamentally because she doesn't understand the words I'm trying to communicate. I don't understand her advanced Korean. You know, she moved from Seoul to New York and Pennsylvania in the early 80s as a student, and her Korean identity, her beliefs, her traditions and norms, the expectations, the limitations of that time froze for the next 3 decades in the US. Even as South Korea changed rapidly, she didn't. Her Korean mindset was locked because she was in a Korean bubble on the East Coast. And then she birthed a child who would never be able to understand her language, her culture, and this massive, massive world inside of her. And so my responsibility that I am willing to accept now, after decades of trying, is to learn and appreciate more and more of her humanity, and to soften the abrasiveness that I have cultivated over the years when it comes to relating to her and to understanding her.
Man. Shot through the heart. That deeply, and the more I watch it and the more of her words, that was my entire experience growing up. I had 2 parents who left Egypt in the late 70s during a time of crisis and turmoil there. And they had an identity and a culture, a way of speaking, a mindset, perceptions, judgments, everything in late 70s Egypt. They came to the United States, and so immediately they're being bombarded, not necessarily negatively, but everything that they're doing is being challenged. Everything, the way they communicate, the way they dress, the places they go. And so you know, they're kind of frozen, as she was saying, in a bubble from when they left. They import that bubble. Everything around them is different and is changing. Actually, even what they left is probably changing, but they're not getting caught up with it because they're in a different place. And so, you know, I was born in 1983, and I'm being raised in the late 80s, early 90s by people whose everything is frozen from when they left, but also trying to assimilate to the US as it's changing. And there's a completely unique language and culture, perception, judgments, society here in the US.
Yeah.
And why this was so pivotal is because she admitted having an abrasiveness toward her mom, which I have struggled with for years with both of my parents. And though my parents spoke fluent English, it goes into these layers. Like, there's actually phrases that I might say, or language colloquialisms that we would understand.
Yeah.
They have no idea.
Sure.
They just don't get it. They don't put the words together in the order that I'm saying, specifically as it pertains to language. That causes like we can miscommunicate speaking fluent English to one another, and we can just have a complete miss of what we're trying to say. Imagine now you're trying to subconsciously communicate through body language and hand gestures and make a point to somebody who's speaking another language, was born and raised mentally in their mind speaking another language, trying to analyze and assess in real time a completely different culture. Long story short, that video is powerful. There's so many children of immigrants here in the States, and we're all being brought up in this hodgepodge of culture and parenting. You know, the little boy that I was being raised by a very subversive, aggressive, non-emotionally attached parenting style. It wasn't directed toward feelings. And I do think we can talk about feelings too much. I do think that there are times where it's like, now I'm like, okay, it's time to move on. But without having any kind of awareness of how tonality, presence can affect a child, you know, hearing things in a certain pattern for a long time will break you down and will cause you to adopt that style, which doesn't really work.
It sounds like you had to almost nurture and cultivate two worlds in parallel.
Yeah, that's hard, man. You're juggling a lot.
Does that sound accurate?
100%.
And so what were the challenge, like on the ground challenges of that growing up and still maybe around today?
100%. And the easiest one to think about it is just communication. Just basic communication. I'm trying to say this is not what they heard at all. And hearing her say, I had to tell myself, they're not trying to misunderstand me, or they don't care. They just don't understand. That's a very fundamental,
that's a shift.
Coming to that realization just immediately, the amount of grace that you now give for your parents and then all their subsequent mistakes is kind of massive.
Yeah.
And I think the next paradigm shift is giving the grace for yourself to understand that a lot of your mechanisms are wrong. And it's not your fault. You just learned what you learned. And now you're trying to unlearn some of this stuff. And so when I hear a woman in her 40s or 50s, don't mean to age a woman, to hear her be vulnerable about her relationship with her mom. I mean, she said she spent Christmas with her mom for the first time in 22 years. That already tells me there's a lot of strain.
Sure. There's something there.
So mad props to her.
Yeah.
I give her a lot of praise and encouragement for her even having that inner conversation.
Yeah.
After, whatever happened, she decides to spend Christmas with her. I mean, that's a step in the right direction. Great job healing, moving forward. But more importantly for her being I got to soften how I see this woman. Is this human being that my mother is having all sorts of other experiences that I don't understand that are informing her communication or lack of communication with me.
Sure.
And she's talking about her mom.
Yeah.
It's one of the most important connections, arguably, that exists.
Yeah.
Yet so many of them are broken. And this is because of a language barrier.
Right.
Now, imagine there was no language barrier. There's still 1,000, there's emotional traumas and there's societal, it's just all this stuff. And it's refreshing to hear someone else just talk about this thing that I don't necessarily verbalize all the time, but I know what's going on. I watched a video and I was like, yes, wow, not just me. Every single one of my friends is the child of an immigrant. Everyone.
So there's a through line there.
We don't talk about this stuff.
Why?
We just don't. We just don't. I'm never hey, at a Christmas party, hey, growing up, your parents really having no idea what you're saying. Has that caused a lot of resentment?
Do you think it's most or not most are aware though?
Absolutely.
Which one? Aware or not aware?
Most are aware.
Okay.
I think if Mo would watch that video, 98% would be yeah, I get that.
Sure.
For sure.
Yeah. So she put communication to an experience, pretty much.
It really buttoned it up, painted a picture, triggered a memory or series of memories, and you're like, yeah.
You mentioned communication was the main barrier, and the attachment style was influenced by that. I'm wondering, there are two main ones from what I gather. It's either overwhelm or abandonment, or a combo of both. So overwhelm is like, you had to take on too much too young.
Yeah.
And therefore you tend to carry that through the rest of your life. Abandonment means there was a lack of physical or emotional attachment or connection, and therefore you use like performance or achievement to fill that gap.
And I would say it's usually a combination of both, which is like just terrible.
So it was the communication barrier kind of like gave you a cocktail of both, would you say? Or which one was it?
The communication barrier, and then all the societal and emotional is kind of like the abandonment. And then so you grow up taking on a lot and trying to decipher a lot and rationalize and analyze a lot to your detriment, our detriment. And then the parenting style from a lot of these cultures are just, they actually all are very similar in thread, which is very subversive, dominant, aggressive. And what that does is it doesn't raise necessarily, generally, people who are like very, very high emotional intelligence, which like they know and understand their emotions. They're able to compartmentalize them and access them when necessary, not act on them if not necessary. And I think that just comes from a general full plate. You're being served up a massive plate as a kid, and it's like, figure it out. And then you do 30 years later in therapy.
Right. I'm wondering too, like we've looked at the challenges. I'm wondering if there are any upsides or benefits of having to figure this way of life out that have served you now.
I would imagine a lot. Yes.
Because like, look, you come from your first generation, right? There's this like tradition that your parents were in. They came here, and then you kind of build this like fast-paced modern American life as a CEO. Like I'm assuming vastly different worlds, that there's got to be some silver lining.
No, there are. Relatability, flexibility.
You can switch on a dime like I've never seen too. I don't know if that is related. Like entering situations or scenarios like and just dropping in.
Yeah, maybe. I just finished a long day at an American school, 5th grade, speaking English all day, and I walked through the door and I'm dodging flip-flops. I mean, maybe.
Yeah.
But the point is having to straddle two cultures, two languages, two or more than two personalities, worldviews, lenses. I think it gives you a flexibility, a relatability. I'm able to relate to immigrants and non, because I did it both. Kind of played for both teams. And I think that is what gives you the flexibility to be able to pivot and rather than just growing up in a very homogenous, and there's nothing wrong with it, but there's the word cultured gets thrown out a lot. Like, what does that mean? Like, because you've traveled to a lot of cultures or you've interacted with a lot of cultures, I guess. And I think that makes generally people more relatable, more understanding of different human conditions, because they've seen and experienced and interacted with different human conditions. I think there's a massive value in that. Like there's an isolation that occurs outside of that. Imagine just growing up in the same country, speaking the same language, eating the same food from birth till death. And there's a lot of people that experience that. It's a different experience when you've straddled multiple cultures, multiple languages, multiple foods, multiple societies. You're taking a lot more in, and it's not about what's better, because there are a lot of people that will be born and die in their country and never leave. But there's no question that that experience is more closed off.
Closed off is a good term.
It's just that they haven't had the opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's fine. No one's dogging that. But having the opportunity to experience other cultures and other languages and other foods.
When I look back on this video hit me too, probably in a slightly different way, the understanding piece for my pops. So my mom grew up in the Philippines, came over when she was 22. Dad's from Ohio, Irish guy. These are going to be divergent thoughts, but let's see where it goes. For the longest time, I was kind of like embarrassed of being like half Asian. So I'd like hide that part in school. Like friends would come over and we'd have like pancit or lumpia, like Filipino foods in the fridge and stuff. And I'd like hide them. I was like, they're going to think this is weird. Like I don't want them to see this side of me. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. You get certain foods for lunch.
Right.
And you just eat it in a corner.
Or like turn and like eat like
yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, we've all grown up like that.
And so
unfortunately,
yeah,
that's a bad thing.
Right.
Because like now.
But it was later, because later, like early mid-20s, 30s, like I was actually the other way. Like it was cool to be like just not white. Like oh, you got like Filipino food? Like it was so like a weird thing. Like I grew up like hiding it, and then now it's like people like want to be associated. And I was like,
I think I don't know. I think the entire country is like that now. I don't think it's a good thing or a bad thing. I just think society was much less open, and generally is. That's one of the most incredible things about the United States.
Yeah,
it's like there are some countries out there that 99% of the people look the same. I'd stick out like a sore thumb in most of those places. But here in the United States, I mean, every color, race, creed, it's kind of a beautiful thing. I think it's,
right.
It's like, that's like the whole world in one place, and so one night I have sushi, next night I have Filipino food, and then Thai food, and then, Italian food, and, all of the cuisines that I enjoy are from all over the world. But as a kid, you don't like have that awareness. You just feel different.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just know you're different. I don't think that's the case anymore.
That's interesting because
we're just so multicolored now. I don't know. Is that word? Can you say that word? We're
I think maybe even
we're much more diverse.
Where you're at probably plays an impact too. Like
Sure.
Out here, it's like Southern California.
Sure. And I grew up, New York, New Jersey, East Coast, very diverse, more than ever now.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Last piece on this segment, the understanding. You mentioned that you're with your mom. It feels like you've kind of shifted how you see and how you handle that relationship today.
For both my parents.
Yeah.
As you age, you realize, no one's getting younger, and they did the best they could with the resources they had. As a father now, I can relate to a father then that always has the best intentions, and then lots of things get lost in translation. It's a move toward grace for their experiences and their shortcomings, but also grace for their attempts. I mean, these are people who came here with nothing, and they built something small, but pretty great in the sense that it allowed me to do what I do. Would have never had that opportunity, and so there's a love and an appreciation there, and grace.
Yeah, I second that, especially with my pops. The last 5 or 6 years, my family has been in 3 different states in a different country, and so each preceding time of like coming back and like hanging out with my pops, I think this has been forever though too. It's like something's missing. Like I want to connect. Like, and this last time we came back, or left, I should say, it was more of just like what you just said. Is like he did his best, and this is what it is, and that's okay. Like I understand the limitations and what he had to go through as well, and it was almost like a sense of like selfishness or craving, I think, of like wanting to be something else instead of just being like, this is what it is.
Look, I think one thing that really changed it for me, if I moved to another country right now where I didn't know the language, I had to learn the language, and I had to raise a family in a culture that I don't know, it would be pretty hard. I don't know if I actually don't know if I would do as good of a job as they did. So
that's empathy, man.
Thanks, parents.